that now. Awesome. Thanks again so much for coming to today's meeting. This is meant to be just like an overview of what's been going on in the world of NABat so far, as well as an opportunity to touch base in terms of the field work that's coming up for 2026, make sure we're all still following kind of the same ideas, know what's going on. And then also for sure, if you have any questions at all, please feel free to put them in the chat, raise your hand and interrupt me. I do have a bit of time at the end of this for like a Q&A if anything needs to be talked about then. But I don't really enjoy talking to a screen for about an hour and a half. So if you want to interrupt me at any point, feel free to just unmute yourself if you feel comfortable or put stuff in the chat. That being said, I know quite a few of us have done this in the past, but there are a few new people that are taking on new grid cells. So I'm going to take a little bit of time to kind of reintroduce NABat, what they're up to, what we are doing. Hopefully it won't be too long for people that know, but then the majority of this meeting is meant to be pretty high level. So any other extra questions or anything specific to what you're working on or anything new, feel free to reach out to me. We can set up another meeting one-on-one to talk more about it, or I can answer emails as needed. So with that, this is our quick little agenda. I did send it to everybody in the meeting invite. So I'm just going to again introduce what we do, talk a little bit about some of the results that we are starting to see, as well as some bat news of what's happened in the last year. And finally look over some little things here or there that happened last year in terms of field season that I think are helpful for everybody to know and will hopefully help you collect the best data you can. I did schedule this meeting to be about an hour and a half. I don't actually expect it to take that long. Excuse me. Okay, I don't expect it to take that long, but I like having that extra time in case people have any questions or anything like that. So that now you know that after this meeting is done, I will be available if anything comes up. Okay, there we go. Great. So to get us started, what is the NABat program? So the NABat program really is a network of people across the US and Canada that are following these standards for how to collect data, bat data. And really their bread and butter is bioacoustic data. So that is your stationary acoustics as well as your mobile transects with acoustics in them. And as you can see, there's lots of different hubs that cover a solid portion of the continent. But the hub here is the hub that we are all part of that helps coordinate the data within this region. So like I said, I mainly focus on kind of the acoustic side of things, but the hub is really just a small part of the monitoring efforts that are going across the whole region. Because there's also lots of data roost counts and exit counts, capture events for bats. There's lots of different things that come together that help us monitor the health of our bat populations and help us make those big scale decisions about what to do. So for the hub itself, it came together. It's a combined effort between the Department of Fish and Game in Alaska, as well as the government of Alberta and the government of British Columbia. All three of these governments committed to supporting the hub so that they can get these good, high quality data sets for bat bioacoustics in the region. But even though these are the main people kind of propping it up, Sensor, the group that I work under, as well as WCS Canada, have supported this effort a lot. Especially WCS Canada was the one that kind of really got it started in BC almost 10 years ago now, or more than 10 years ago now, as well as the NABat program. Like I said, they are the ones that have set out these standards that we follow, and they are the ones that can give us these large-scale continental analyses that can help inform our decisions. So when I talk about those standards, the way that NABat works is they work with grid cells. So they have actually made this grid cell formation that covers the whole of North America. So every point in North America is part of a grid cell. It's a 10 by 10 kilometer cell. But then within that, they've developed a way to assign priority to the grid cells following kind of a randomized sampling design, so that when we are out there sampling, we're trying to cover our bases as much as possible to get a good understanding of the landscape without oversampling specific areas. So of course, we're not going to sample every single 10 kilometer square across the region. So NABat talks about the priority cells. So this is the top 5% cells that in an ideal world, we would all be sampling, and that would give us strong enough data information about the region to start making these trend analyses. But as you can see, this is not for all of Alaska. Just this little southeast portion of Alaska has about 70 of these priority grid cells, and BC has close to 500 grid cells. So unfortunately, we cannot sample all of those, but this is more what it looks like we are sampling currently. So last year in BC, we sampled 57 individual grid cells. Each grid cell has about 2 to 4 units within it, and some of them have driving transects. And in Alaska, we had 10 grid cells, same thing. And last year was the first time that we started kind of going deeper into Alaska, into Anchorage. And based on some conversations that I've been having with folks in Alaska, there's a good chance that the hub will end up just kind of including the whole state of Alaska as well. But we'll see how that goes. But so far, this is kind of the general spaces where we are sampling currently. And I wanted to point this out because if you think about how in an ideal world we would have 500 grid cells that we would be sampling, the fact that we have 57 means that those 57 grid cells that we have are really important, because they are the basis that we have to start making these trends and start looking at the general the general state of the bats in both BC, Southeast Alaska, and Alberta. So with that, the reason why we are so interested in checking out what the bats are doing in this region is because there's some very real threats that are knocking at our doors right now. In the case of white nose syndrome, I think most of us in the call have heard about it. White nose syndrome is a disease caused by a fungus that was introduced, we think, from Europe. And it's been slowly making its way across North America since the early 2000s. And it's in BC now, for sure. It's been in Alberta for a few years now. And this past year, for the first time, we've detected positive PD, so that's the fungus that causes the disease, positive PD detections in kind of the southern border of BC. And meanwhile, in Alberta, we've actually started finding white nose. And there was hibernacular counts that were done this past winter across caves in the Rockies for BC. And unfortunately, they found lots of dead bats on the ground, lots of evidence of the fungus growing on the bats, and actually lots of activity in the bats too, which is an indication of them getting disturbed by the fungus while they're hibernating, and they'll possibly lose a lot of energy with the disturbance and eventually pass away. So we know that it's surrounding BC. Even though Alaska feels like it's further out, there is a chance that the fungus could actually travel up to the territories and across that way. So it's really here. And this is the time that it's really, really important for us to continue this monitoring. Now that we have almost 10 years of data that has shown that the population sets stayed relatively steady, this is how we can start putting the data down to show our governments, to show people that this fungus is a real threat and we need to take real action to protect our bat populations. Now, on top of white nose syndrome, which mainly affects our smaller bats, the bats that hibernate in the region, we also have a lot of other bats that are affected. So the bats that hibernate in the region, we think of as the smaller bats, the bats that hibernate in the region, we think of as the smaller bats, the bats that hibernate in the region, we think of as the smaller bats, the bats that hibernate in the region, we think of as the smaller bats, the bats that hibernate in the region, we think of as the smaller bats, the bats that hibernate in the region, we think of as the smaller bats, the bats that hibernate in the region, we think of as the smaller bats, the bats that hibernate in the region, we think of as the smaller bats, the bats that hibernate in the region, we think of as the smaller bats, the bats that hibernate in the region, we think of as the smaller bats, the bats that hibernate in the region, we think of as the smaller bats, the bats that hibernate in the region, we think of as the smaller bats, the bats that hibernate in the region, we think of as the smaller bats, the bats that hibernate in the region, we think of as the smaller bats, the bats that We also have another big threat that we can think of, which is wind turbine and wind development. So in terms of wind development, it's just going to continue to go up. There's lots of interest in renewables, and it's a good thing to have lots of interest in renewables, but unfortunately we do see that they have a big negative effect on our big bats, the migratory bats especially. So in the fall of last year, NABat actually published the results. So this is not actually a published paper, but it's just the code and the results for their trend analyses for the hoary bat as well as the silver-haired bat. I feel like this kind of went under the radar a bit, but feel free to scan this QR code. It'll take you straight to their link, and then you can see the results for yourself. But pretty much across the continent, it's not looking good for either of these two bats. But if we just focus in our region, it actually suggests relatively stable populations across BC and Alaska. But I think it's fair to say that that's mainly because that kind of this part of the region doesn't have as much wind development yet. As you can see, BC has about 300, and Alaska has about 140 wind turbines that are recorded in their databases. But that doesn't mean that they're going to be safe forever. And Alberta is a good example. Just next door, you can see that the hoary bat, their relative abundance is estimated to have declined by about 39% in 10 years. So this is all data from 2012 to 2023. And this is the data that we are currently collecting that has gone into NABat and they've used to create these estimates. So in Alberta, we see the amount of wind turbine development in Alberta is significantly higher than in Alaska and BC. And this might be the reason why this estimated decline is so high. And we also have to keep in mind that these bats are not just staying within our region. They're traveling further south to other areas that may or may not have as many protections and stuff like that. So the more that they're traveling, these long distance migrators are more likely to encounter these wind turbines. So we need to monitor for them, and we need to have the data to back up when we're going to governments, to the wind turbine people, and telling them this is what we're seeing as big trends, to hopefully get them to pay attention and change something about it. There's been lots of effort and lots of work on this across many regions. So there is hope, there's lots of stuff, but this is why it's really important for us to continue to collect these data. So these are the results from NABat. They publish results, depends on kind of how they're going with stuff and how things are going for them, but we see 5 to 10 years, so published some sort of big trend analysis. But obviously there's a bit of a lag. Like I said, this was published last fall, but it only included data up to 2023, right? And that's where kind of the hub comes in. And that's where we're trying to publish same or similar trend results, but on a yearly basis, so that you are aware of what's going on with our bat populations from year to year, rather than having to wait 5 to 10 years for NABat to put stuff out. So in the past, when we've created these reports, they're usually some sort of a PDF, and it just goes out to the specific people that are interested or people that ask for it. But now the plan moving forward that I'm trying to get us to is to actually use this interactive website. So I'm not going to share the link right now with everybody, mainly because the link is going to change. But also we're just finished finalizing details in this report. This is for BC. We will have an Alaska report as well in June. But the idea is, first of all, it's a bit more interactive. You can kind of read through it, see any sort of information. But the one thing that I find more interesting is having a map with all of the sites, and then you can zoom into your site of interest and actually see which bat species were recorded at each site. And you can organize them based on the year, right? So I know I've heard from a few of you that you're always interested in knowing kind of what you collected, stuff like that. The hope is instead of having to create specialized reports for each individual person that's interested in this, you can just follow the link and then zoom into the site that you're interested in, look what's been collected there. I know that this map, when you zoom out, looks a bit overwhelming, so we're working on cleaning that up a bit. And we're also going to buffer the locations a bit more so that this can be public facing without giving away exactly where we're going or who's collecting or where we're collecting the data. And under this report as well, we'll have kind of these activity trend models. So WCS was kind of leading the charge here, and they're the ones that created these activity models with the hope that when we're looking at the general activity of bats, it'll give us the trends a little quicker because we're seeing how active the bats continue to be in an area. And for the most part, the bats have remained very stable throughout the whole year. Sometimes it looks like it's a slight negative or a slight positive, but it kind of balances itself out. And we can see it also based on the regions here. But what we did different this last year is we also explored dynamic occupancy. The reason for occupancy, going towards the dynamic occupancy, is that activity levels have a lot of noise mixed in with it. Whereas when you only look at occupancy, you're only looking to see whether you detected that bat at that site for that night. And it can reduce a little bit of that extra noise that comes from the activity data. So sometimes it makes it easier to actually see the trend and detect that signal. And the other interesting thing about these occupancy is we can look at these covariate effects. So this model is very similar to the model that NABat is using, so it's also a little bit more comparable. And we are starting to look at some of these other covariates and seeing how they impact the bats. So in this case, this is for the little brown bat. You can see we can look at the effect of the distance to road and whether harvest has an impact on whether the bats are found in specific sites. And the idea is you'll be able to see this for all of the different species and see kind of the general trends of what's going on with them. And here, for example, the little brown bat has remained relatively stable over the years that we've been doing the sampling. But like I said, considering that white nose is just around the corner, this might take a bit of a dip. But that being said, with this report, my hope is we will get this out to you. The link will be available, and then that link will just continue to be updated year after year. So you can use the same link to go back in and check in on what's going on. So that is my quick update of what I've been up to, what NABat has been up to in the last few years, and just kind of making sure that everybody's on the same page about the bats, but also understanding why it is that we really need to continue collecting these data and why you guys are all so key and important to this effort. Before I move on to talking about the field, are there any questions about this? Anything else you would like to see in these reports, or any comments? Give you 2 seconds while I take a sip of water.
I think our only comment here from the Lake Los Douglas Channel area, hopefully you guys are getting some good data from ours. I always feel like it's like, are they getting anything from it? But it's like,
Yeah. And I get that sentiment. And that's why we're trying to go this avenue of having these kind of public reports so that you can see the data that you're collecting and you can zoom into that map, find your area, see what's going on, and understand that the data that you're collecting is feeding those trend models. So that trend estimate that NABat put together used all of your data. Everybody's data here that's submitted data in the past helped inform that NABat report, also helped inform this report that I'm putting together. So I do want you to know that it's good. And If we ever have any issues with the quality of the data and stuff like that, I'll be in touch, kind of thing. But so far, everybody's been doing a great job.
So we did have one because I think I mentioned it too. I think it was Mandy I mentioned it too, because we had a bear that had kind of gone through and saw this thing and just knocked it over. And then he basically,
Yeah.
he almost pooped on the monitor, the little stinker. But
Yeah, that's happened to me before too. And I will actually talk a little bit about that later on. Um, but yes, that happens all the time. And if you have 1 year of bad data, it's unfortunate. But that's where the coming back year after year can be really, really helpful. Because 1 year of bad data can be kind of looked over if you have 5 really good years of data. You know what I mean? So we kind of work with what we have, and the models that we're working with are all trying to account for those little variations as much as possible. But with that, Shane, let's talk about data collection. Let's talk about kind of your piece of this whole part. Like I said, for the most part, everybody's been doing a great job. Um, it, I haven't had any like real concerns about the data so far. And it's mostly at this point, I feel like because it's been over 10 years of people doing this, I think I'm starting to just get nitpicky about some stuff that will just make the whole process a little bit simpler and a little bit easier to move through. So that's what I'm going to be talking about here. So as much as I'm going to be like highlighting different points and stuff like that, please keep in mind that you guys are all doing a great job, and don't feel like I'm just attacking you for stuff. So to get us started for the stationary deployments, if you've been using WCS equipment in the past, you would remember that last year we did a paired deployment with new sensor equipment as well as the old WCS equipment. Well, this year is the first year that you will only be using sensor equipment. So last year you should have returned your bat pole to WCS. If you didn't, please get in touch with Heather to make sure that she gets a hold of that. But that means that for you, you will need to be purchasing a new pole because we're going to follow the same lead that WCS had of not trying to ship poles around too much because the costs are just going to be too much. So you'll just have a pole on site. My preferred method for putting up poles is using painter poles because I find that they're kind of the easiest, relatively sturdy, and then just using a wooden stake to get it into the ground and using good old electrical tape to tape the pole to the stake, as well as you would still have kind of those guy wires that anchor everything down. This is my way to do it. I find that it's easy to find all of the equipment. You can just go to a Rona or a Home Depot, and they tend to have painter poles and all of the equipment that you need. So feel free to use that way. That's going to be the way that it's described in the field guide that I will send a link to afterwards. Or if you are really used to the same pole as before that WCS had, which was like a pole, an empty pole on the inside, and then you just had a rebar that went into the ground, you're more than welcome to find a pole like that in the rebar as well. Either one of those two work, as long as you're able to get the microphone, and in this case, the unit actually, because the whole unit is going to be at the top of the pole there. As long as you get it up there, at least 3-ish meters off the ground. And all of this purchase, we will refund you for it. So make sure you keep track, you keep copies of all of your receipts for that too. Going back to just kind of more general for everybody, I'm just going to repeat this because I think it's worth repeating that when you go out in the field, you're going to try as hard as you can to deploy in exactly the same place so that it looks the same. I really like these two pictures because it shows you first that it was deployed in a very similar manner, but also you can see the progression of growth of this tree in the background. So something like this is the only reason why I would say it's okay to move your pole is if something has changed in the last year that completely changes the way that the recordings are going to be, right? Because remember, whenever there's anything that a bat can run into and hit, that forces the bats to change the way that they're echolocating, so it makes it more difficult to actually see the differences between species. So if you find that there's a lot more clutter than there was last year at the same space, you can move it, try to move it 5 to 10 meters or 15 to 30 feet away from clutter as much as possible. But try to keep it the same if you can. Yeah. In terms of Survey 123, I will be using it again this year. It seemed pretty simple. I hope everybody on your end found it simple. Pretty much is going to be asking for the same questions as before. I will have that automatically fill in option again, where if you have the exact grid cell number as well as the exact cell ID on the search bars, it'll automatically populate everything else afterwards, so that hopefully it'll make it easier for you. If you put in the exact match and you are pretty sure that it should be there, but it's not there, consider changing. If you have, for example, Southwest 1, consider changing it to Southwest A or the other way around, or just putting Southwest and seeing if that fills in. With these automatically filled in, make sure you still double check that all the information continues to be true this year. Hopefully it is. It shouldn't have changed, but just it doesn't hurt to check that. And other than that, everything else should be pretty clear with the field forms. Again, I will send the links to the 2026 field data alongside this recording and alongside other information that I'll be sending away. But within the form itself, it does a pretty good job of explaining what you need to be filling out. Just keep in mind that whenever you're putting any numbers in, all I'm asking for is metric. So I know all of our Alaska peeps tend to go more on the empirical side. Anyways, try to switch it to metric, so meters versus feet, before you're putting that data in. And finally, last year, people did a great job of taking the photos of the deployment itself. Very, very helpful for kind of figuring out what's going on in the space. But I kind of want to encourage you to try and take other photos as well. A few of you did. And when I talk about other photos, I mean photos that could include yourself or your team, like a group photo with the detector up, photos of you setting up the unit and stuff like that. Stuff like this, stuff that I can use to give presentations. If you don't feel comfortable with your face being on a photo that may or may not be used for a presentation, you don't have to include your face. But all of the other kind of like fun things around the deployment itself. Somebody took a really cool photo of an antler stuck in a tree, which I think is cool. Not very useful for me when it comes to presentations and stuff like that. So just kind of keep in mind that it should still surround the deployments itself and kind of the bat world. And then finally, one issue that a few of us had last year was regarding the submission of the actual forms. So as you're going through the form, at the very end here, you'll see a little check mark at the bottom. If you are in self-service, it'll give you the option to send now or save to outbox. If you're not in self-service, it will just give you the option to save to outbox. So what I would recommend for folks is, especially when you're deploying, just save it to outbox for now. And then when you go back to retrieve the data, that's when you can like go back in, check it out, and then send it after you've retrieved, just in case the retrieval pickup date changes or there's something that happened to the deployment, like Shane was talking about, coming in and seeing that a bear had taken it apart. You can actually take a photo of that, take a photo of what it looked like when you came back under that other photo section, because that'll first be useful for me to know and I can see exactly what went on. But second, again, for presentations like this or when talking to new people, it's good things to give examples of to show. So for the most part, if you can, save to outbox for your deployment and then actually submit after you've actually retrieved the data. If somebody else is retrieving the unit and the data for you, it's not a problem. You could still send it in. And then if anything comes up, if anything weird happens or anything like that, you can either email me and let me know and I'll keep track of it, or you can actually, under the sent option, you can copy all of the data in, add any extra information, and resend it again. I don't want to encourage you to do that too much because there could be situations where I get a ton of extra of duplicates in kind of my side of the things, which is just kind of an extra step. So as much as possible, try not to send two of the same sample, but worst case scenario, I'd rather have two duplicates than no data at all. And I just wanted to point out, when you save to Outbox, it'll pop out here in your main kind of in the main page when you open it up, and you can open it up there, find the survey that you're interested in, and resubmit it. I know a few of us here, not a big fan of Survey 123 and prefer to still use the paper data sheets or data sheets that have been used in the past by WCS. You are welcome to do that still. I'm still going to try and push you to do Survey 123. I promise that it's easier than you think. But if you do decide to go that way, I need you to email me those data sheets as soon as you are done collecting the data. It happened to me a couple times last year where people didn't submit through Survey 123, and I had to kind of hound people about getting me those data sheets. Although this is kind of repeat sites and repeat visits, there's still important information that I need to know regarding how much the site's changed, that it comes from these Survey 123s or the field data sheets. So please, if you're doing the other data sheets, just email them to me as soon as you can, so that I can keep record of that as well. So last year, we had orchestral units. Those were the temperature and humidity sensors. And I think there was a bit of a miscommunication on my part there, but for a few people, it didn't actually start recording the data, even though they put it together and had deployed it. So I just wanted to review the Kestrel app and how it works. So if you don't already have the app, these are the links that you can scan to get to the app itself. But once you connect to the app, it should look something like this. So if you have a Kestrel unit with you and you put the battery in, that's when it's turned on, right? And you'll be able to connect. That's the only way to turn on a Kestrel unit. So if you want to turn it off, all you have to do is remove the battery. But once the Kestrel unit's on, it doesn't mean it's recording quite yet. So you need to look at your phone, hit connect so that it actually connects, and then at that point you'll get this page with the dashboard or the settings. The first thing that you'll want to just double check, all of these should be already arranged, but go under the settings point and click on manage device data, and make sure that you are recording at least 10 seconds every 10 minutes. So that means that the Kestrel is on and recording every 10 minutes throughout the day. If you can't do 10 for whatever reason, I know some of us are not using Kestrels, they're using other devices. You can go up to 15 if you need to as well. So double check that that's good to go. The other thing that opens up in this menu is an option to delete any current log. So if you have the Kestrel unit at home and you're testing it to make sure that it works right, it'll record your home temperature ambient. So when you go to deploy, you can actually delete that data so that I don't get that extra data. It doesn't hurt for me to have that data, it's just not very useful. So if you can clean that up before you deploy, that would be great. And again, that's just under the Manage Device Data menu. So once you've checked that, it still hasn't technically been turned on. So you need to go to the dashboard link. And this is when you would actually hit start recording. In this dashboard, it'll show you what it's currently recording and stuff like that. So you can make sure that it makes sense. And then once you hit start recording, that's when it'll start going through the 10-minute intervals of actually recording data. And that will be saved to the unit itself. And then last year I went over this, but this year you can just go into the Google Doc that I'll be sending on how to download that data and submit it to me. Sweet. Now, the next one is mobile transects. So we kind of had a similar situation as with the kestrels for a few of us too. So for the mobile transects, especially if you're using the sensor equipment, it's with the echometer touches. So those are the ones that actually attach to your phone or a tablet. And when you first attach that echometer to your phone, you'll see this is kind of the main page, and it shows that it's in live mode. Right now, it looks black because it's a picture, but in real life, this is actually moving, and it's already kind of recording and detecting what's out there. So you'll see the spectrogram moving and sounds kind of going through it. So just because you see that movement doesn't mean that it's recording. You need to make sure to hit this little red button here. And the red button is going to have this kind of circling red line that goes around it, and that's how you know it's actually recording. Now, the other good point about this, if you see, there's also a little button on the side of it with an M. That is for manual recordings. So if you hit that, what it's going to do, it's just going to record a continuous recording throughout the whole hour or so that you're out in your car. So instead, you need to make sure not to have the little M showing, but just the full red dot, so that it's just a triggered recording. So that once you're driving, it's scanning and only recording whenever it detects an ultrasonic sound of any kind. And same thing, this will record directly to your phone or your tablet. So please make sure before you go out in the field that you have enough space in the phone or tablet. And if you need to, bring a battery pack with you to make sure that it doesn't die halfway through. It's not a super big battery suck, but depending on how old your phone is and how good it is with battery, it's good to keep in mind. And this year, like I said, Sensor is providing all of the equipment. So we'll be getting brand new mounts for the cars and stuff like that. This is kind of what you'll get for the driving Transect. We're hoping to be able to send this all kind of put together and made up for you so that you don't have to worry about putting it all together. But if we find that it's going to be too difficult during shipping and stuff like that, in that big document, there'll be like pictures and like step-by-step of how to attach all the different bits. But the quick summary is you use this guide that's usually used for phones to put the Kestrel into it, and then you attach the actual microphone to the back of it with a zip tie. So this is all a party of zip ties that will keep everything together, and then this little contraption goes on top of the hood of your car, facing backwards for recording the bats. And then the last update that I have for mobile transects is that this year, I also want to get pictures from the Transects. As you can see, I don't have a ton of driving Transect pictures, so this is the best that I could do. So it'd be great if you could also get pictures of your car with the unit on top of it, of somebody deploying it. Try really hard not to include your license plate in it. I am not interested in that information. But if any fun pictures of the deployment or stuff like that would be greatly appreciated. And that will be like an extra column in the Survey 123 that you can fill in the same way that you do the stationary acoustics. And I know that there's been lots of budget cuts and availability and stuff like that. But as much as possible, I really, really want to encourage you to do these mobile transects. This is truly the only way we currently have to try and estimate the number of bats in the landscape and actually try to see that difference in the numbers. And for example, that NABat report that I showed you, those numbers that we have, they have it for both occupancy and abundance measures. And the occupancy measures still look stable when the abundance measures start to drop, which makes sense, right? Just because the number of bats are going down doesn't mean that the bats are not still in the landscape. It's usually until the numbers are really down that you start missing the bats in the landscape. So it's really, really important for us to continue doing these mobile transects because it's the best and the quickest way to show a decline in our bat populations if it is there. And then submission. So you got to go out, do all the fun part of trekking through the forest and getting great pictures and getting out in the sun. And now you get to go back and do some desk work. And honestly, this is kind of the most important part for me and also for yourself is to do this right, so that we get on top of it. The big thing is I want to encourage you all to do this as soon as you collect the data. So consider it part of field work is to have the data, back it up to your system and ship it off to the right. Ship it back to me or upload it to the USB that stays in the kit if you're working with a kit. If I don't get the data, you don't get to see what happens with it, and you don't get to see if anything cool was recorded in your site. And unfortunately, this has been kind of something that happens occasionally across grid cells where I don't get the data for 1 year, but I get it 3 years later. And then the effort of putting it back into all of these trend analyses 3 years later just becomes a lot bigger. And now there's a lot of other extra handling that needs to happen. So if you actually want to see your data integrated properly, do it within this field season, so that it can get in there. And I think I harped on this last year too, but getting this folder structure is key, especially when you get the SD cards. If you're copying this to the USB, follow this specific folder structure because it honestly saves me so much time when I only have to do, because I have to do about 170 ones of these, whereas you only have to do like 3 or 4 of them, right? So please make sure you follow the proper folder structure. If you are doing survey 1 to 3, you won't need to worry about field form or photos, but under the site info, you will just add the Kestrel data in there, the temperature and humidity data. And like always, if you're part of a kit, you will have your SD cards and ship those to me, but you will also back up that data to a USB that stays with the kit. If you're not part of a kit, back up the data to a local hard drive, another USB, or anything else that you have in hand. And you can either send me the USB or send me the SD cards. But I want to have a copy of it somewhere, just in case Canada Post messes up and we lose some of the data. We want to make sure that we have a backup somewhere in there. If you are sending me your own SD cards or your own USB stick, make sure you label it properly. And by labeling, I mean take a piece of tape and write your name on it and wrap it around it in one way or another, or write directly on the SD card that it's your stuff. I get hundreds of SD cards and lots of USB sticks, and they can get mixed up relatively quickly and really easy. So make sure you add that, and also add to the thing to the envelope. There we go. Add in the envelope your return address of where you want me to send this back to you. This year, we managed to send most of these things back in January, so you should all have anything that you sent my way. If you didn't get in touch with me, I'll make sure to follow up on that. But hopefully this will just make it easier for all of us there. This is the address that you can ship it to, same address as last year. Like I said, do it as soon as possible. You can send me an email with your field data sheets and temperature data if you want, the SD cards or the USB with all of it. And again, I want all of these data in by August 1st. This is really, really important because if I don't have the data, it pushes the whole thing back. It makes it really, really difficult. But if you have issues with the deadline, it's okay. Just get in touch with me so we can coordinate and figure something else out. If I don't hear from you and I haven't received the data by August 1st, and I've been trying to get in touch with you and I don't hear anything, I'm just running on the assumption that something went wrong and no data was collected. So just stay in touch if it's not possible, but please, please try to make that deadline. And just because it's that important, I'm just going to put this up there again, August 1st. I want everybody to put it on their calendars right now that that's kind of the drop dead date for shipping me data or getting in touch with me at the very least. You won't believe how much time this takes up of my kind of workday of just following up with people. I mean, I'm sure a lot of you that are on this call are part of the good ones that really are on top of it, and I really deeply, deeply appreciate you. But following up with people can take weeks and even months of my time of just sending that email back and forth and trying to figure out what's going on, especially if I don't hear back from people. So just stay on top of that so that I don't look like this poor lady that's kind of losing her mind. And instead, I can get right into the QA/QC and running the data and processing the data so that we can get those reports out in time for all of you. Because that's the next bit, is we manually verify the data, we make sure it all looks good, and then we include it into our statistical trends and analyses, as well as upload all the data to NABat so people can use it. We're also uploading it to WildTracks, because on WildTracks you can actually see the recordings themselves. Still figuring out exactly how we're going to do the permissions, but the idea is if you are the owner of the data, so for example, if you're part of the government of BC and you work for BC Parks, there'll be an organization for BC Parks, so you can go in there and see the recordings themselves, see the tags, and kind of get familiar with that on WildTracks. Unfortunately, on NABat, you can't see the recordings. You can see the tags themselves, but sometimes it's cool to actually see the spectrogram of what all the different species are. And then finally, the reports. Like I said, this is what we all want at the end of it, right? We want to be able to see how our bat populations are doing, and what's the cool data that we're collecting. So the hope, and every year we get a little bit closer to it, is that these reports will be out by March. Like I said, this year we're just finalizing some things, but it should be out in the summer, so that people can see it. But the idea is so that you're aware of what's been happening in your site before you go out. And if there's any need for anything, you can kind of touch back on that. Awesome. So, any questions at all about this process, about the data collection bit, anything that came up for you that maybe I haven't mentioned but you think might be useful for others to know? Feel free to put it in the chat or unmute yourself and let me know. But if not, we're close to the end here. Okay. So for the end here is, I did get a lot of confirmation emails back from people when I sent out the invite for this meeting. But if you haven't gone back to me yet, please just send me an email confirming that you will be collecting the data this year, so that I can create the schedule of where the kits are going to go if you are using a kit, and make sure that everybody's aware of what they're doing. If you remember from the past, we do have that Excel sheet that tells you when you should be deploying and collecting. It'll be very similar to last year. I'm going to try as much as possible to get you to deploy and collect in the same time frame as you did last year. But let me know if you think that's not going to be possible this year. And then for people that are under contract or people that are volunteers, I will be mailing out those waivers and that information within the next 2 weeks. So make sure you fill that out and get it back to me so that you can actually get reimbursed for all of your expenses. And just a quick reminder that if you do have expenses, you do have to submit that expense sheet within 90 days of purchasing. It's not that it's impossible for us to handle it after that time, but it just complicates things on the financial side for us, unfortunately. So as much as possible, try to stay within that. But I will be sending out those contracts to the people that it applies to in the coming weeks, as long as I get confirmation from you that you will be doing it again. Awesome. And with that, like I said, thank you again so much, everybody, for the effort that you've been putting into this over the past 10 plus years now. We are working towards making it more accessible to you so you can see the fruits of your labor. But if you have any questions or anything else, like always, feel free to reach out. There's my email, and we can get in touch. And hopefully you all have a great field season. I'm going to be here in my office anxiously waiting for data to start coming in. And if there's no questions, I'm going to stop recording. And I will send the recording out to everybody as well.